Welcome to your daily dose of theological German. We are on installment number 15 of the Evangelist John, this excerpt from Ziefle's Graded Reader. I'm going to break with tradition this time. Normally on the 15th installment, it's always the last because I refuse to do more than 15 on any one author, and so this is the last one on Schlatter. It just so happens that it's just one sentence, but typically I would try to just do whatever was left or a big chunk at the end with much less commentary and more just kind of reading through to kind of like get used to German. But I'm going to break with that plan for this week because first of all, it's only one sentence, but it's just a complicated one, and I think it'll just be helpful if we do a little bit of commentary on some of the things here. So let's start by translating, and then we'll get to some of the issues. So before we start, there's a da compound here, which is a slightly unique case from many we've seen so far. Often da compounds will be picking up something that was previously stated and bringing it, kind of, we would use the pronoun it or something in English to bring it into the next sentence. This is a slightly different case. I think what's going on here is what you will find if you look up a chapter on da compounds and whatever grammar you're using. In April Wilson, it's chapter 12. And you'll find that sometimes these da compounds can function as a placeholder for something that's coming up in the sentence, and I think that's probably the right thing here. Rather than try to connect this to what was just said, I think we want to connect this to what is said right after. And so to smooth it out, we're going to say something more like by means of or by saying that. And so let's just go ahead and start translating this, but you'll see how I want to smooth it out to deal with these das clauses that immediately follow it. So we're going to say something like, so this is of course a subjunctive, I think. Actually, it's morphologically could be past tense, but I think you'll see why it makes more sense to take it as a subjunctive. And then I'm actually just going to translate it in English with the gerund because it's going to flow more smoothly. So I'm just going to say, by saying that Jesus would take away the sin of the world. Now we'll go up here and pick up the subject. The baptizer, or the Baptist. Okay, so you can see what I've done there. Really, it's like by the fact that the Baptist says that Jesus would take away the sin of the world. So I'm just smoothing that out to say, by saying that Jesus would take away the sin of the world, the Baptist has, and now I can just forget this pronoun because I've moved the subject, right? Otherwise, that's why the pronoun is there. He has. So the Baptist has brought light into his message, because he shows through it how, es gibt here is a construction, so it's like there is. He shows through it how there could, of course, because you have this modal, could be a baptism and repentant turning back and a near kingdom of heaven for those who, after all, or in the end, were nothing different and had nothing different than that which the world gives everyone. So there's really an awful lot that you could try to deal with this sentence, but I'll try to just stick to some of the most important parts that are going to really have an impact on getting the translation right. And in fact, you might decide in the end that I didn't translate everything totally correctly in that initial run through, but that's okay. It's all part of the process. It shows you how this kind of works. Let's make it a bit bigger first, though. So first I want to talk about some subjunctives that are in this sentence, because those are always important to catch. Here you'll see this Wegname is definitely a subjunctive, and the reason why is that it is got a third person subject, being here Jesus. And because of that, you know that it can't be a present tense, because in the present tense that form would have to be first person Wegname. Ich Wegname, right? And so in fact, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. If you see a verb that looks like a first person present, but it's actually clearly a third person verb based on the context, then chances are you're looking at a subjunctive, because that's a very common form of the third person subjunctive. And the subjunctive does a lot of different things, but in this case, this is the most common use of it. And if you look in April Wilson's textbook in chapter 30, you can see where she talks about this. The most common use of the subjunctive in German is this example where it's in indirect discourse. So it's reporting on something that John said, but without putting it in direct quotes. And so that's a very common use of the subjunctive form. in German, and so that's the case here, and so that's why I translated it that he said Jesus would take away the sin of the world, because in English we'll use a modal auxiliary like would in cases where German uses the subjunctive, and we do it for the same reason. It's because it's indirect discourse. So when we say that the Baptist said that Jesus would take away the sin of the world, it's indirect quoting, and so that's the exact reason why you have that form in English. So that's the right translation there. I also translated sagen as a subjunctive, and the way I translated it, sort of, although I smoothed it out so much that it might not have been obvious. But the reason why I'm saying I translate it as a subjunctive is because somehow in the end I wound up with a participle or like a present tense, but morphologically that looks like it should be a past tense. The problem is with this verb, the morphology is indistinct between the past tense and the subjunctive. And so it could be either, and I'm not sure it makes a huge difference here, but based on context, it didn't flow as well for that to be past tense. And so in any case, that's something you'll have to try to resolve when you're working on a sentence like this, when there's an ambiguity like that. You work with it that way. But the other subjunctive that's here is actually this one, könne. And again, you'll notice that that's would be the form you would expect of a first person present. But the third person present would be kann, if I'm not mistaken. And in fact, for wegnehme, in case you're wondering, the third person would be wegnimmt. Oops. Okay. So those are the forms you would have seen. And so könne here is also definitely a subjunctive, and that's why I translated it as there could be, there being again the way we do these same kinds of functions in English when because we don't have a subjunctive. And so we use could to kind of defer the certainty of the action being construed. And so that's how there could be a baptism. That's the way that we would express it in English. I'm not sure how to explain it any more clearly than that. So that's important. The only other thing I want to point out in this sentence, because we're getting way over time here, although it is your Friday, or it's not your Friday, sorry, it is the 15th episode of this series, and so that I think, we always go overboard. Anyways, the point is, down here you have this other little construction where you have wären und hatten, and the way I translated this was I actually just went back and picked up the object of the verb here, nothing different or nothing other, nothing else. I just picked that up twice when I was doing the initial translation, and that's kind of what you have to do, because this als here is like we use the English word then, it's a comparative. And so what's actually going on is you've just got a double verb, and you can have that sometimes in a German clause where you'll just have two verbs that take the same subject and object, and the verbs get conjoined with the conjunction, which here you can see und, and you just have to kind of apply them both. So there's different ways you could do that. I just resupplied the object, but you could say, here is it's a relative clause, so you could say, who, after all, were and had nothing different. I just expanded it and said, were nothing different and had nothing different. But you can see how were and had go together in that sense, and then the rest of the sentence flows. And if you didn't pick that up, this sentence would actually be really confusing to translate, because you might be tempted to end the clause at wären and then try to start a new clause here and say, they had as such. I mean, I don't even know what you would do with it. So the solution I've indicated here is the right one. That's the proper way to handle it. So just watch out for that. If you see two verbs joined by und, you might not be looking at the clause splitting at und. The clause might actually still be intact, and und is just joining the two verbs within the clause. So just keep that type of thing in mind. Anyways, I hope you found that helpful, and we will be on to a new set of excerpts starting on tomorrow's episode, so tune in. As always, thanks for watching. Do subscribe, like, share this with all your friends, and make apologies for how long of a video it is. But you know what? If you're still watching, well, then you deserve it to be long, frankly.